So why don't we start? My name is Bill Friedheim. I'm the chapter chair. Welcome to what would normally be our June luncheon. It would normally be a sit-down event. This year for obvious reasons, and last June for obvious reasons, it was not a sit-down event. So I hope you brought your own virtual food. I'm sure that you can see that Barbara Bowen is with us. She has a lovely smile on her face, and maybe that's because she's up in the Adirondack wilderness right now, obviously with a pretty good, we hope a pretty good Wi-Fi connection. She's gotten some very well-deserved R&R. As I commented to her earlier, I think there's a real glow to her face. There normally is a glow to her face, but I think even more so now. Barbara really looks terrific, and I want to thank her for joining us today. Today's meeting is mainly going to be a retrospective on the 21 years that Barbara served as PSC president, from May of 2000 to May of 2021. You probably noticed that I already put in the chat two links, one to a really lovely thank you statement that Barbara wrote at the end of May on her last day in office at the PSC, and the other a really wonderful article by John Talton, who used to be the associate editor of the Clarion, in the Independent. John is the editor of the Independent, and I would suggest that people, if you haven't already, take a look at both. And maybe Samantha, and yes, before we start, let me just thank Samantha Sherry, who's staffing this committee and has staffed all of our, virtually all of our chapter meetings during this pandemic. And we owe her a real debt of gratitude. Samantha, maybe if you could just screen share Barbara's thank you piece, and then maybe after a moment or two, screen share the piece that was in the Independent. What we're going to do today is the majority of the meeting is going to be the retrospective with Barbara. At the beginning of the meeting, we're also going to quickly give you a link to the PSC's endorsements for the June 22nd Democratic primary. Then you're going to speak. By you, I mean people in the audience. Barbara's going to speak. We're going to have a back and forth, and at the very end of the meeting, we'll give you an update on what we know about the NLC negotiations with regard to retiree health care. So let me just frame this. Back in February, I believe on February 5th, I wrote Barbara and asked us if she would join us today, June 14th. And I wrote, "You have hundreds of friends and comrades in the retiree chapter who joined you in walking picket lines, strengthening chapters, sweating the details of committee work, demonstrating in the streets and halls of power, committing civil disobedience, debating policy, lobbying legislators and government officials, building alliances, fighting austerity politics, and if I may borrow a phrase from the late John Lewis, making good trouble. All this was done to build a better and stronger union and to build a better, stronger university to educate, quote, the children of the whole people." And that quote is taken from the founding leader of the Free Academy, I believe back in 1847. The Free Academy eventually became CCNY, and that's basically the precursor to the City University of New York, whose mission has been educating the children of the whole people. So I asked Barbara in that email if she could take us on a guided tour of those 21 years, the ups and downs, the obstacles confronted, the continuing challenges, but ultimately the successes and joys we experienced collectively. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to do the guided tour together, but we're going to do it in this spirit. And I just want to quote a sentence or two from Barbara's thank you letter. She said, "What I loved about the union we have built together is that members have risked investing part of their political hope, whether for a better university, a better city, or even a better world, in the work of the union." Yesterday, by email, and unfortunately Barbara doesn't have a terribly good email connection up there in the Adirondacks, but given the back and forth, Barbara suggested what I think is a wonderful frame for a meeting. She said, "I would like to suggest that participants be asked to volunteer one PSC highlight from the past 21 years, whether a demonstration, a resolution, a contract provision, a chapter event, a policy, or I would add a policy of victory, or even a partial victory, given that this has been a tough road to hoe." So we're going to do that initially. So I want you to think of a PSC highlight and to give you a moment or two to kind of collect your thoughts on this. And I'm going to ask people to kind of keep it to a minute, not to make a long extended speech. I mean, once Barbara speaks, I mean, Barbara will speak after people talk about their highlights, but once she does, there'll be additional time for discussion, for questions, and for interaction between us and between Barbara. But before we do that, Samantha, and basically I'm giving you a moment or two to think of your highlights. If you could just put up the PSC endorsement page for the June 22nd primary election. And if you could just slowly scroll down, it lists the candidates that the PSC has endorsed, including a whole host of city council candidates for borough president. On that page is also a link to a workshop that the PSC did on ranked voting. Now, this is going to be the first election for most of us, certainly for me. And I've been around the block for many, many decades, and I don't think I've ever participated in an election with ranked voting. There was a really excellent workshop run by the PSC on the ins and outs of ranked voting. And in a moment or two, I'll put the link to this page in the chat. What I'd like to do now, if you can take down the screen share, Samantha, is invite participants to come up with their highlights. If anybody has an image they would like to share, we could facilitate screen sharing. And so let me look at the list of participants, and I see we have a number of hands up already. The first hand up, by the way, is Cecilia McCall. And I should note that when Barbara was elected the election was conducted in April of 2000. The other principal officers were Cecilia McCall's secretary, John Highland, treasurer, both of whom are stalwart members of the Retiree chapter, and of course, Steve London as the first vice president. So Cecilia, you want to start us off with a highlight?
Yes. Hi, Barbara. You do look wonderful.
Oh, thanks. You always look wonderful. Cecilia, you always look wonderful.
Thank you. I was also not only just secretary, but I was also director of legislation back then. And that department has grown magnificently. We didn't have email and we didn't have, the social media, but we were hands-on and we did a lot of lobbying. And I remember one of the first people we lobbied was Bill Perkins, who was then in the city council. He later went to the state legislature, but he's back in the city council now. And when we were sitting talking to him about getting funding for Cuny, he looked at us and he said, "Well, does Cuny have a union?" We didn't know how to respond to that, but I don't think anybody in the city would dare to say anything like that now, because I think our presence has been made over the last 21 years. So I just wanted to remind Barbara of that.
Okay, thanks, Cecilia. Ann Friedman?
Barbara walked into office in, I guess it was May or June of 2000 with her new executive council and bargaining team. And we had to pick up right away to get ready for negotiations. And so we went to look in the files, of what had been done before. And there was a carton, if you're moving, you pack your carton and whatever. Well, there was one carton and it was halfway full with some, handwritten papers or whatever. Well, Barbara proceeded to walk into her meetings with her fountain pen, her elegant handwriting, her loose leaf binders, which maybe started like this and grew and grew. And
I think we lost Ann.
We lost Ann. Wait.
Ann? Well, we'll come back to Ann about, yes, the PSC had.
Where did I leave off?
Well, you're talking about the old filing system at the PSC.
Anyway, the achievements over the last 20 years are just phenomenal. If you look at the contract in 2000 and you look at our contract now, it is phenomenal. For me, obviously, given my history, the reduction in teaching load, stands out in my mind. And it's exemplary of Barbara's ability to think so facilely and so creatively and just problem solve in ways that, are incredible. And so thank you, Barbara. I could say more, but I'll put it in writing.
Thanks, Ann. Doris Hart?
Yes, Barbara, great to see you and congratulations on your retirement. I will never forget the protest in front of Governor Cuomo's office in Manhattan when there was a die-in and we were all there. It was a great protest. And I don't know if we got what we wanted, but we certainly tried. And thank you so much.
Well, luckily we all survived the die-in and are all still alive and still protesting. Erwin Yellowitz?
Am I unmuted? Yes, I think.
Yes, you are.
Hi, Barbara.
Erwin.
Of course, I was an officer with Erwin Polishuk in the pre-2000 days. So, Barbara, I know how hard it is to do that job as president. I know what it is. It's a 24/7 job. It's an unbelievably stressful job. So I want to thank you personally for what you have done and your willingness to serve. My highlight is the 2006 contract, the attention that was given to the welfare fund, and the understanding that the welfare fund was so important to not only retirees, but to in-service people, the willingness of the leadership, including you, of course, as the president, to understand that and to make that part of the contract, and if necessary, even to divert some money from other uses to the welfare fund. And that happened again later on, but that 2006 was very important because the welfare fund was a little shaky at that time. So thank you very much, Barbara, and have a good retirement.
Thank you. And can I just say, Bill, can I just say, honored as I am to be thanked and congratulated on my retirement, and honored as I am to be with the Retirees Committee, I am not legitimate in joining you yet because I'm not retiring. I'm going back to the classroom as an active member, and I can only dream of becoming a member of the Retiree Committee when the moment comes. So that's the committee we all want to be part of, and that's the chapter we all want to be part of. So, but I'm not there yet. So thank you, and thank you all. And please feel free, as Bill said earlier, this is our 21 years. It's not my 21 years. And it's beautiful to hear people speaking about things about my history, but we all have histories in the PSC, and it'd be wonderful to hear from any perspective of our collective shared work. So thank you so much, and thank you especially, Erwin.
Yeah, as Barbara has emphasized, it's our 21 years. I mean, Barbara would argue, Barbara, I don't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you believe in superheroes. I mean, I think Barbara is maybe a close approximation to one. But it's not that Barbara waved a magic wand and all of a sudden these wonderful things happen. And in fact, the way to look at this is as a continuum. We made tremendous progress on lots of issues. There's still a lot to be done. And I agree with Barbara, that let's look at what we did collectively under some terrific leadership from Barbara and other principal officers, but what we did collectively. Bonnie Nelson?
Hi, Barbara, and congratulations on getting out from underneath that load. I have two things I'd like to contribute. Bill said we should think of highlights of our time in the PSC, and undoubtedly the biggest highlight for me, and I was reminded by Glenn Kissack of this because he posted a picture, which I hope we can share later, and that was the 2011 sit-in in front of Governor Cuomo's office in Albany, when quite a number of us were arrested, including myself. And I think that was one of the highlights of my life, to tell you the truth. I was arrested for a cause, and it was a good cause. And I thank you so much for leading us into that. I became a hero to my family.
Oh.
The second thing I want to mention, and this is kind of mixed, is one of the contracts, when you negotiated increased research leave for new faculty, the librarians were left out. And boy, were we mad. And what we did was we organized. And you really taught us a lesson that if you organize and fight, you can win. Because we organized and you listened and you provided ways for us to get together and organize. And the next contract, we were included in the research leave, and you've not left us out ever since, because we learned, you taught us that when you stick up for yourself and you organize, you can make a difference. So thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Dave Kotelchuk?
Barbara, it's exciting to talk to you on your retirement. I will say that you're not a retiree in training. I think you've trained. Whenever you're ready to join us, we welcome you. One of the highlights that I remember is the fight for healthcare for adjuncts. It was a fight that took place in the welfare fund and in the union and in the contract negotiations. And you led that fight. There was a point at which you and we and all of us had to risk the very existence of the welfare fund to win our point, because those folks were not backing off at that point. The majority of the welfare fund board supported you, and we won, and we won support for and healthcare benefits for thousands of adjuncts. Not all, and that's the continuing struggle that we continue to wage, and you will continue to wage with us. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope people can see it, but I'm sharing a picture of a demonstration in front of a board of trustees meeting at Baruch College in, I believe, September 2011. And what Dave talks about was a 3 or 4 year struggle to get adjuncts on to the city health plan. And to underscore what Erwin said, it really took an insolvent, well, I think some of the issues have been resolved by then in terms of the welfare fund, which was relatively insolvent when you took office in 2000. But certainly getting adjunct healthcare off the books of the welfare fund and onto the books of the city was really, I think, an important moment in PSC history. And as Dave pointed out, there's still much more to be done in terms of adjunct issues and the 2-tier system that we have at the university, but real progress was made over those 21 years. Jim Pearlstein?
Yeah, Barbara, looking forward, Pearlstein's consumer testing service rates retirement at Best Buy. The buzz phrase today is bargaining for the common good. But I want to take us back. You remember the Immigrant Workers Freedom Ride in 2003, 100,000 people in Flushing Meadow celebrating immigrant workers. But the day the rally was over, everybody disappeared. politicians that day were fighting to be able to speak on the platform, but everybody disappeared the day after, except for us and a handful of other people. We organized with the New York Civic Participation Project with people who subsequently joined us, like Kate Fordresher and Debbie Bell, to fight for immigrants' rights to driver's licenses. And we won that. It was a battle where we had to organize, we had to build coalition with community, and we did that. And we got Spitzer to issue an executive order. Now, we didn't build the kind of base we needed to hold on to that, and we ultimately lost that victory. But it's an example, going back to 2003, of us bargaining for the common good and fighting with the community for something beyond our own contract and beyond our own budget. So thank you.
And John Hyland, who, as I mentioned before, was one of the 4 principal officers elected in 2000, together with Barbara. John?
Sure. It's great to see you, Barbara, and congratulations. And I have so many happy memories of working together, being together. I'm trying to shut off. Somebody called up. I couldn't. It's hard to pick one, right? I mean, there have been so many. Let me pick one though. I remember at the end of a negotiating session. This is maybe 03, 04, 05, somewhere in there. Deborah Bergen was at the negotiations as a staff person, and I can hardly tell this without getting filled up myself. But at the end of the session, we would go around and talk about the session and so forth. And Deborah said that she had never felt so proud to be part of the union. And she started to cry. And I think that's the way a lot of us feel. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Bob Cermelli? You unmuted, Bob?
Okay, we on? Barbara, you're looking relaxed. Enjoy. You know, for me, there's so many items that we have to be proud of. But I guess for me, it was the workload, teaching load reduction that we negotiated. I think it was the 2016 contract, but it wasn't really actually finished then. We just negotiated an agreement to talk about it. And I have to say, I was very skeptical that we could do anything with that, because this followed a 13-year effort at City Tech to reduce the teaching load at City Tech by 3 hours. So I thought, all right, we negotiated, they just threw us a little bone and they're going to sign off and this will never happen. But it happened, absolutely amazing. So thank you, Barbara, and thank you for all the other wonderful things you've done and your terrific leadership. And you really inspired me a great deal. And of course, we will continue to work together on the Welfare Fund Board as trustee emerita. Good, look forward to seeing you.
Thanks, Bob. Renata Breidenthal?
Oh, hi, Barbara. I think I don't know where to begin, but the very first speech you gave as you assumed the presidency and announced that you would be interested in seeing an international committee was so exciting. And of course, my hand leapt up. And since then, Tony O'Brien and I had co-chaired it then for 15 years. And Manny has taken it now and expanded it and made it even stronger and more powerful. And I really want to thank you for that initiative. It put us in touch with academic workers elsewhere and other kinds of workers elsewhere, expanded our vision, you know, of what it is to be part of an active union. And we're still doing it. And I know for a number of members have said to me that it has become in important ways their political home. So I want to thank you for that vision and that perspective and the opportunity to work within the union, a strong institution on international questions. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
And another member of that international committee, Jackie DeSalvo. Jackie?
That's what I wanted to speak about. All the things that we did that the leadership supported us on. But I think especially of the time when we stood up against Randy Weingarten and the whole UFT and pushed for a resolution opposing the Iraq war. To me, that was real courage. And Barbara had amazing courage. She supported us in that, although there was such antagonism towards us. And in general, what I appreciate about Barbara is that, well, there were two things. One, after that difficult vote on the AFT, Barbara could walk out of that meeting smiling with Randy Weingarten after she just almost assaulted her. And Barbara's ability to be gracious in conflict, even when isolated, is what really, really moves me. And I think that we're thought of around the country as having the most progressive foreign policy of any union, perhaps except the dockers on California, who right now are blocking Israeli ships from docking. But otherwise, it's pretty much us on foreign policy. And our foreign policy, while it opposes lots of major policy things, also is ultimately, if not explicitly, anti-imperialist. No other union almost, except the dockers and the UE, take that position. And Barbara's willingness to be one of the few votes on the AFT executive opposing Randy on those foreign policy issues. Randy is the key CIA labor person. She was in the first group sent to the Ukraine to justify the coup, and on many, many other things. And Barbara has taken, our positions, the positions that we passed in the AFT that summer when we had to defend a substitute motion because we couldn't even get it through the Foreign Affairs Committee. And we did it, and Barbara stood by us, and she went into that damn AFT executive and held this unpopular position. I just want to say one thing more about Barbara. The thing that most amazes me about Barbara is that there are two different levels of union positions, and one is commitment to long situation of total transformation of the society, and at the same time to do the daily little technical fights in the contract and other things. It's very rare. I don't think it's happened since the 1930s.
Yeah, a number of us, like Jackie, are just bubbling over in terms of our enthusiasm about the union, about these highlights, but so that we can get as many people as possible, in this part of the meeting to speak, let's try to keep it to 1 minute. I know that's kind of hard since there's just so much to talk about here. And next, Marcia Newfield, who for many years when Barbara was president, was vice president for part-time personnel. Marcia?
Well, some of you have stolen the thunder of the adjunct health insurance, which certainly was a victory and a battle. And I think of other battles, particularly the getting leave for pregnant, for people, for parenting. And we were at the Board of Trustee meeting. It was 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. And Barbara's calling Patterson or somebody up there. And it was like, I thought, oh God, let us go home. But she did it. And somehow she got pregnancy leave, parental leave. That was really a triumph, I thought. And other things that were down to the beyond, over the wire, not the wire, way over the wire. And Barbara, kept persisting. That's persisting with optimism.
Yes. Thanks, Marcia. And yes, we were the first union in New York State to get parental leave for our members. That's the big one. Eileen Moran?
I guess there's so much to say, but I think the highlights for me was the change in tone, particularly for equity for the less well recognized. And we saw this centrally and we saw it in the chapters. It erased the barriers between HEOs and CLTs and faculty, as well as between faculty and adjunct faculty, which I think the tiering that had preceded our leadership and Barbara's leadership in particular, was undercut. And we did that with contracts. We remembered those least well-paid members, whether they were adjunct. And obviously the big success in moving towards adjunct parity in the last contract has to be recognized. But I think the persistence that others have set, like I was also very proud to be part of what Barbara did with resolutions, because the anti-war resolution that's already been membered, it took us many years to get them to acquiesce on that. And I think it is that nevertheless, she persisted when others fell short. She gets that, Barbara deserves that accolade before Elizabeth Warren, because she was there first with that. And I guess, from that, and also we were one of the first unions that raised and supported reparations in those early AFT meetings, where it sort of split the UFT's membership, because all of a sudden their membership of color were divided between what they were obediently supposed to do and the fact that we were supporting what they really wanted. So really kudos to you, Barbara. It's great to be in a collective with you.
Yeah, it's not only that we brought resolutions to our state affiliate and our national affiliate, and it's not only that we brought resolutions only to lose year after year after year between 2002 and 2006, but in 2006, we won. And it had a real impact, I think, not only on our affiliates, NYSET and AFT, but the national AFL-CIO in terms of taking a position on the Iraq War. That was really, really important. And it was a long, extended fight. Joe Wilson?
Hi, Barbara. Salute to your personification of the best qualities of scholarship and activism. In my particular case, I'm also grateful that the union fought with me during arbitration, and in spite of all of the misinformation coming from the administration and so forth, and the fact that we found out later that they violated numerous laws and the Constitution, the administration violated the Constitution and laws, we're still pursuing our federal claims. On a personal note, you always took time whenever I saw you to chat about my situation and my case, and I'll always remember that. And then, excuse me, on a more bittersweet note, in terms of racism in Cuny, the union was, leading in many, many struggles, but change has not come to the university. In many ways, it's regressed. So that battle continues. But thanks so much, and keep up the good fight and the great scholarship.
Thanks, Joe. And Albert Sherman, who for many years was chapter chair of the CLTs. Albert?
Hey, Bill. Hi, Barbara. How are you?
And you're down in Florida, right?
I'm still here. I'm still in Florida. Yes, loving every minute of it. Retirement is good, but I just have a little quick story about the CLT chapter. When I first started, it's like every Tuesday and Thursday now, I have to find something to do. It's like it was like something that I got myself so interested in, not knowing that ever was going to happen. And thanks to Barbara, I mean, when we went to her and we had issues, because nobody else would listen to us, and we had issues, and she listened, and we had meetings, and things came out of it. I mean, we had a bump up in our last contract in our salaries, and that was so helpful, because CLTs were the lowest paid on the food chain, and it was embarrassing in how much we do. And Barbara heard that, and she fought so hard, and it made me feel so well, and it made me feel there was hope out there. So I want to thank Barbara for all of her efforts she did for the CLT chapter, and for the encouragement she gave me to be a union leader. Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Albert. And Marva Lilly, who is one of our new representatives to the PSC Executive Council, and Also, a belated happy birthday to Marva, who just had a big landmark birthday. Marva, you're
Thank
on.
you. Hi, Barbara. One of my fondest memories of you was before I retired, because you were part of the faculty at John Jay's graduation at Madison Square Garden, and we were staff were ushers.
Yes.
And on your marching out, you got out of line, you gave me a hug, and I didn't know you were do that well. But I had attended many of the rallies, and I always remember that. Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
And then Glenn Kissick. Glenn, I believe that you want to share an image, right? And I think you have the capacity to share your screen if you want to.
So just hit share screen.
Share screen. And then hopefully the image is on your desktop and you can retrieve it.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. Can people see that or?
Yep.
Oh.
Okay, well, so that's March 2011, and we're in front of Governor Cuomo's office. We wouldn't be there long because we would be arrested, but we were demanding restoration of the millionaire's tax and restoration of money for Cuny. And as you can see, Barbara's right in the center, as she was in the center of just every struggle. And you can also see Jim and Bill and Cecilia. And I do remember being handcuffed next to Bonnie Nelson. And there's another picture. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so can people see this one or?
No, we still have the one from
okay,
2011.
All right, so I have to screen share again, okay.
Yeah, I think you have to get out of the screen share and
share screen.
So stop share screen and then share screen again.
Great, because you can take a good look at some of the people right in this meeting and see them on the screen up close. There's Bill and Steve, Jim, Cecilia. It's great.
So let's see, I'm not seeing how I.
Well, why don't you describe the pictures and
okay, well, the second picture is a picture of Barbara in a blue jacket, her hands behind her being arrested by New York City's finest. It was at Baruch, and it was, you know, a contract battle. And, you know, despite having a bad arm, Barbara was arrested. And the third picture that I had wanted to share was a picture in the Bronx at a Stella D'Oro rally. Let me see if I can get that up. Yeah, okay. Can people see that one?
Yep.
So that's a picture in the Bronx at a rally in support of the Stella D'Oro workers. And, you know, Barbara didn't just stand up for people in our union, she stood up for other workers as well. And these were bakery workers who were on strike for over a year. And in the corner, you can see Lee Cutler, who was the secretary treasurer of NYSET at the time. And I remember one of the rallies where Barbara was told that she was not allowed to use the bullhorn. And there was a captain who was quite adamant about that. And he said, if you use the bullhorn, you'll be arrested. And most people would have taken that as, you know, a good reason not to use the bullhorn. But Barbara did use the bullhorn, and that captain was beside himself with rage. And I don't know why he didn't arrest Barbara, but he didn't. And but it just struck me that that was an example of her commitment and her courage, and I'll never forget it.
so why don't you stop the share screen, There we go. And let me look at the list of participants. Yes, Barbara, it seems like you were arrested many, many times. I'm beginning to wonder, are you up in the Adirondacks doing hard time in some prison up there, or did they let you out? You're not, turning big rocks into small rocks somewhere in the Adirondacks.
No, unfortunately, too many people are, right?
Yes, that is unfortunate. Greg Dunkel?
Yeah, I was chapter chair in the central office chapter, and one of the main issues in that chapter, which has a lot of computer programmers, was overtime. And for years, we suffered from forced overtime, and it was the grievance that the PSC filed that got overtime changed. So I got 200 hours of comp time. Another colleague of mine got nearly 400 hours of comp time. That's like,
wow,
a big, big chunk. And that was a big thing that the union did, which went along with all the other work that it did in the international, political, and the struggle. And Barbara was right there offering encouragement and aid as this struggle developed. It all tied together, and I have the utmost respect for her. I'm through.
Thanks, Greg. And Florence Tager?
Yeah, I wanted to say, that what everyone else has said was really important about the work you have done for the union. But I wanted to emphasize the issues of race that someone else just raised, and that has come to the fore more recently. But when the union first started, it was hard for me. I'm from Med Rivers. It was hard for me to get Medgar to even consider a new union head. They were very hesitant to see anyone else but the Polishuk Union, which had gotten us 4-year status. And it was gradually Barbara was able to win over, because by the time I left, we had a chapter that was beginning to function rather effectively within the union. And then later, there was Barbara brought on someone to study race in the union. And that person came to the women's committee, which I was on, and reported a great deal about what was going on. And then today we now have a committee that is finally dealing with race in Cuny. And I am very proud to see that that's happened under your leadership. And I wish you luck in where you're going now. Take care, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thanks, Florence. Elizabeth Starcevic?
Hi, Barbara. And like everyone else, I want to say thank you. I also want to join in all of the greetings and the praise. I want to remember the way in which we marched always on Labor Day, and you were always trying to get the group to sing old labor songs, which they didn't know, but which they felt the music of. And that was wonderful because, of course, I came from all those labor songs, so I really felt it. I also want to, I mean, certainly we've been in all sorts of picketing of the trustees, etc. And I also want to talk about, as you did in your letter, about the places where we've lost ground. We've lost ground in terms of a larger vision of what higher ed could be, even though we're supposed to be very grateful now that CUNY has gotten more money from Albany. And of course, we're always grateful. But since we have been starved for many years, as you fought and fought and fought, and still Cuomo managed to back down on so many things. So as other colleagues have said, we've been starved on the question of full-timers. In terms of keeping full-time, we have been wonderfully supported in terms of support of part-timers, and there's a lot to do still there. We've lost in affirmative action, we've lost in questions of race and participation, but how could we you can't do it all historically, and you can do it all in terms of so many things that you've done. So thank you very, very much, and adelante.
Adelante.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Peter Ranis? I see you, Peter, but I don't hear you yet. Are you unmuted?
Okay.
Okay, we hear you loud and clear.
I want to congratulate Barbara. 20 years of really powerful service to our union, to political action. I want to just give a brief anecdote. York had won a New Caucus election, I guess in '99. And I organized a meeting at a restaurant. I forgot the name of it. I'm losing a lot of my cells up in the brain. But we spoke then, and Barbara called me around 1999, said, "You guys won at York, but I'm not sure I should run and as the leader of the New Caucus, being a woman and being in Romance languages and English." And I remember I encouraged her, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one, but I do remember our conversation. And she did go on to lead us in major struggles. And I do remember, I'm always amazed at our meetings at the PSC, maybe over 100 people, no matter who raised their hand, Barbara knew their names. That always flabbergasted me. And I remember in the negotiations with the Cuny, they had a really tough lawyer. And who was the woman with 10 bracelets on each arm, who was
Brenda Malone.
Brenda Malone, and how
That
Barbara
brings back
handled
memories.
Yeah, Barbara handled her with skill in the plum. So I'm always impressed with Barbara as our leader, and I thank you for your good service to us.
Thanks, Peter. And then another Peter, Peter Jonas, who I assume is down in Baltimore.
Near Baltimore.
Near Baltimore.
Unlike the others, Barbara, I want to complain. And my complaint is that you gave me very little room to complain. I would battle for non-classroom people and classroom people, both in New York and in Albany, particularly. And you always helped us lead the way and do the right thing, as you've said and others have said, especially for the lower level people. Not that you didn't battle for the full professor and the other high level people, but you did the right thing. And so I'm going to join the crew and say thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Merlene?
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Right. I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to Barbara for igniting activism in all of us. Thank you for myself. I really appreciate you as a very strong leader, a woman. You are an example to us all. One of the highlights I wanted to share with the group was the Wake Up Como, Stop the War in Cuny. I really loved that, and from that I just took off. I couldn't stop and not see myself at a rally. Thank you for that, Barbara. And I also want to say, on behalf of all HEALS, I'd like to thank you so much for all the wins you had for everyone else, but in particular, those who were suffering a lot. So thank you. And as you always say, together we have accomplished more and we will continue. Thank you for the fight. It's great to see you.
So thanks, Merlene. And Relissa Galloway Perry, and then we'll finish with Joan Greenbaum. But Relissa?
Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Relissa.
I couldn't miss this opportunity to just continuously thank you for making me more active than I guess I intended to be over the years. It's been a long haul, but I have to say, at seeing you in the helm for over 20 years has been a joy. And, you know, I know it's been a struggle because it hasn't always been peaceful and it always hasn't been pleasant. But I have to say, on behalf of the HEALS, you have advanced us in more ways than we can never thank you for. And we know that you have left us in good hands with the new administration. So we love you, we thank you, and we can't wait to see you again in some form of activism. Yay!
I'll be there.
Okay. Before Joan, let's do Sherman Heller and then Joan Greenbaum. Sherman?
Okay, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, I just wonder, I spent many years under two administrations, you know, always on the pension committee, always striving to eliminate the inequity between the two pension systems. And there was always so much frustration, you know, the way in which adjuncts were treated, not getting any credit for their pensions, the way in which sabbaticals were treated. And it always looked like a big wall until Barbara came along. And those issues were not only addressed, they were impacted, and there were breakthroughs with them, for which I and many, many adjuncts and most of us retirees are very thankful. And in addition to that, I just want, you know, after all has been said, and we all are aware of Barbara's contributions and her accomplishments, so all that's left is really a heartfelt thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sherman.
Heartfelt thank you from lots and lots of people. Joan Greenbaum. Joan, I don't know if Joan could do many highlights, but I think Joan is also going to talk about something else. Joan?
I am. Barbara, I'm here to present you with an imaginary gift from the retirees. And it's less imaginary than it seems. You have a huge imagination, so it will be clear. You're leaving being a scholar to be the leader of a huge union. I would like to say a few words from, well, Anthony and Cleopatra, of course, as you return to Shakespeare. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. Other women cloy the appetites they feed, but she makes hungry where most she satisfies. You do, you do. And then on behalf of us, I would say, as you return to your scholarship, and there will be some books on Shakespeare awaiting you in your apartment, and some awaiting you with this gift certificate, which is right now invisible. And to say that you are an inspiration in action, this personification of being a human being, warm, wise, oh, and so full of wonder. And we want to say, enjoy your journey into the sabbatical. That's what the books are for. And teaching and beyond. And here you are.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara.
Oh my God, Anthony Cleopatra.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you so much. And thank you, Retirees Chapter, a present. I didn't expect that. That's beautiful. Books, reading.
Reading. And you're going to have hopefully a little more time to read, although I think you read a lot, despite the fact that your days were pretty much 24/7, putting out fires and creating good trouble. And yes, certainly the last year and a half of your tenure, I don't think you expected a pandemic and what that year and a half had in store. And I'm never ceased to amaze by just how active the union has been, you know, over these past 15 or 16 months. You know, I think it's a real tribute to you. I think it's a real tribute to our 30,000 members. I think it's a real tribute to all of us. And yes, people talked about lots of things, parental leave, you know, I don't think anybody mentioned, you know, sabbaticals at 80% pay, the New Deal for Cuny, you know, a vision reimagining Cuny that was created by the PSC in alliance with students, alumni, you know, community groups, a whole legislative package, which we devoted part of our last meeting in May to the New Deal for Cuny. As Erwin Yellowitz and others pointed out, you helped rescue an insolvent welfare fund. Not only rescued it, but I think as retirees will tell you, our welfare benefits are absolutely bountiful, I think. Address the issue of adjunct healthcare. Built in organ, you didn't do it by yourself, but when you and John and Cecilia took office in 2000, you built an organizing department from scratch. Really, really important. Reconstituted the Clarion. So that the Clarion used to be like a lot of union newspapers, where on every page you would see pictures usually of union officials with shaking hands with a politician. As webmaster for the website, I knew not to put those pictures on the website. Those pictures did not appear, I mean, on occasion there might have been one or two in the Clarion, but what did appear in the Clarion was Barbara the wordsmith and many other PSC members as wordsmiths. The Clarion, really became a really vital part of our union. The 92% strike authorization, I think somebody alluded to that. That was what, back in 2016, we didn't go on strike, but it made a real difference in terms of settling, a contract, that and many more. So Barbara, the floor is now yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really I'm overwhelmed with all you've said, and just seeing you, all of you, and I have memories of each of you. I had prepared some things to say, but I'm tempted to tell my stories about each of you, because as you spoke, I thought of them. I thought of, well, just maybe tell one about Marcia, since she was very succinct today at the bargaining table. And we all know that the Taylor Law prohibits strikes. And some of you were there at that table, and you'll remember, I see Lorraine nodding, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And there we were sitting there, and we had, as usual, some of our rank and file members sitting behind us at the table. And we literally sit across from each other at the table. And the Cuny, horrible vice chancellor for legal affairs, who was out to crush the union, that I think was his main goal. He was saying, pounding and saying, you'll never have this, you'll never have that for adjuncts, whatever it was. And Marcia wrote on a piece of paper, just hand wrote on a piece of paper, the word strike. And she, Norma Ray style, she held that paper up to the adjuncts and others sitting behind her. Yes, and she stood with that word strike. And this this provoked the legal counsel for Cuny. He went insane. He went bananas. He read, he leaned across the table. He read, it wasn't hard to read it. It was large letters. He could read it upside down as Marcia wrote strike. And then she holds it up in our own little Norma Ray moment. And he was like, okay, that's it. You violated the Taylor Law. I'm going to put sanctions on you. I'm going to stop your dues payment. That's it. Your payments are going to go. You have now declared that, that you are on strike. And of course, we backed him down from that, and we backed off and everything else. But it was a glorious moment, and it was Marcia at her best, and it was a daring moment. And it's just one of the moments that I could pull out from just thinking about you, thinking about the work that you've done, which is really in some ways what I'd most like to talk about, because there's a story about each of you. I mean, John Hyland told that beautiful story about Deborah Bergen, which will make me cry to think of it. John, Cecilia, who were officers with me in the very first scary, terrifying years, along with Steve London, and some of the things you spoke about, especially Greg, when you spoke about the HEO arbitration on overtime. Steve had such a huge role in that. And then Mike Fabricant, such a huge role in the New Deal for Cuny, Andrea Vasquez, Arthur Reen, DeSola, Steve continuing, and now Sharon, and also Nivedita, also huge roles, and every rank and file member. So in lots of ways, I would just like to talk about all of you, what you did on the floor of the AFT, and some of you who haven't been AFT delegates don't know how pitched those battles were, and how there were physical fights to get to the microphone to speak. You think the DA is raucous, you should see the AFT. And some of you saw it and were there, and we would plant people in front of the microphones the minute one session ended, and there might be a lunch break, and we would assign somebody to sit there throughout the lunch break. We'd bring them their little lunch. They would be the microphone sitter, so that when the moment came for somebody to speak, we would have our person right there. And there were a few, I would say, nearly physical battles with some folks from NYSET to get to the mic, even to speak before they cut you off. And a lot of you were the key people in those battles. And I'm seeing you right now. I mean, each one of the things, almost every single thing that you talked about were things that we did in struggle together. I mean, those arrests, thanks Glenn for those pictures. And, you know, all of those events, they would not be events if it weren't for all of us, right, together and organized. I mean, one person sitting in front of Governor Cuomo's office does not do anything, but all of us there together, and all of us at the demonstration for adjunct health insurance. I see so many of you who are here today in that picture on adjunct health insurance. Ann Friedman right in the front row. I saw Bob Nelson, you were right in the front row. I saw Shelley Mengelniger from the CLTs. That was all of us together. So everything that you spoke about is all of us. And those pictures, I think, are a good manifestation that we don't do this alone. We have zero power alone. And we also have zero power if we're 30,000 or 300,000 if we don't organize. It's not just the numbers, it's the organization. And I think that's what comes through. And what I feel in listening to you, every single thing that you mentioned, Jim talked about the continuity on immigrant rights, and others talked about the welfare fund. None of that happens without all of us. And so much support and staff support, and it's completely collective. And I think for me, that's the proudest thing. And so thank you. Thank you, books. I'm so overwhelmed. But I did take in what Bill had said to me about speaking today, and I'm just going to pull up something and trying to respond. Bill asked me to reflect on my 21 years and to present something today. And I thought that, and he also pulled out something from the letter I wrote to members, thanking members, and you read it earlier, Bill. And I wanted to start with that. But before I do, I wanted to thank Bill, who was part of this insurgency in the union long before I was. Bill was there. Bill had taken such a courageous position at BMCC running for office. Joan, long before I was. Peter Rannis, you spoke about that long before I was. John, who was such a leader at LaGuardia. Steve London, who brought me into union struggle when I was pounding on the door of the Board of Trustees saying, oh, the union's a dead end, I'm not gonna have anything to do with it. And Steve, as usual, was persistent. And Steve said, no, you've got to listen. The union has leverage, political leverage and power. You've got to bring that activism into the union. So many of you, whom I'm looking at now, Lorraine, Anne, many of you were in this struggle and showed the way and did this before I did. And I've learned from all of you. So, but Bill, I especially want to thank you for your leadership of the Retirees chapter, and also for being a path breaker in a time that was really very, very difficult, very difficult. And Bill asked me to reflect on one of the things that I had said in the message I sent to members, which was about people taking the risk of investing their political hope, at least a part of their political hope, in the union. And their political hope, not just for improvements in the union, but also for a different union, a different university, and a different city, and maybe even a different world. And I wanted to think a little bit about why that happened, and then also try to reflect on one of the things that Jackie just brought up earlier when she talked about the tension between the daily struggles for things like what you mentioned, Sherman, pension equity and HEO arbitrations and daily issues, and then a larger vision and how those things could possibly work together. So I took Bill's request as kind of a question and a challenge, and I wanted to think a little bit about that. And then I think Bill will open it up again for any comments or questions. So I'll just like to reflect on that a little bit. So my question that I really came to thinking about what Bill said is, why so many of us located our hope initially in the 1990s and then continually. This was not a one-time only thing. This was not a founding moment, and if you weren't there at that founding moment, you weren't part of this. This has continued. So my question is, why did so many of us take the risk of locating political hope in our union? And why did we think that the union was a potential vehicle for larger transformations? And I don't think that's an obvious, I don't think the answer is obvious. And so many unions, by the time our leadership, which really came up through the 90s, so many unions by that point had made the decision, consciously or unconsciously, but consciously, to the sense that it's a repeated decision, to define the scope of the union as improving material conditions for their members and their members only. If it improved conditions for others along the way, great. But the focus of the unions, under so much attack as they were then and in many ways continue to be, was redefined so narrowly after the more visionary unionism of the initial rise of the labor movement. I know we have some labor scholars on this call, and also after the purges of the communists from the labor movement, there was a shrinking of the vision of labor. And that's the atmosphere in which we were striving when we first decided to take this big step. Not even first, because there was an earlier insurgency that some of you on this call were part of in the PSC in the 70s, right? But why we took that step in the 1990s. And I've been thinking about that. And also, I just wanted to say, before I go on, part of that step, Renata remembered that very first retreat we had as union leaders or as union activists. And Renata, you attribute to me the idea of an international committee. I always thought of it as your idea, that you popped up and said, why don't we have an international committee? And I said, okay, you can chair it. But so I thank you for that intervention. But thinking about this question of why so many of us who came to Cuny from all different kinds of experiences, and many of us from movement experiences, why we thought to take the risk of pooling our political hope, which is a brave thing to do when there's so much working against that, pooling it in the union. And I don't by any means want to suggest by that people gave up their political activism or hope in other places. And I think that was a tension we've always struggled with. But so many of us felt that this was worth investing our vision and our work and our consciousness and our collective struggle in. And I thought about that, thought about how one of the things I've learned in doing this job that I didn't see clearly enough when I came into it was how much Cuny has attracted people from movement politics. I guess that's obvious to a lot of us, but it wasn't immediately obvious, and it's certainly not the way Cuny sells itself. Cuny relentlessly sells itself on economistic terms, on mobilizing people into the middle class, no question about what the costs of that are, no questions about what happens with the working class or the poor, and Cuny presents itself endlessly that way. But so many of us here, and you know this because I'm looking at those of you from these histories, came to Cuny because of our political histories, came to Cuny out of the old new left, out of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, other movements. Many of us chose to locate our teaching, our scholarship, our service to students at Cuny. And I think that's a first step that helps to explain why so many of us were willing to take this big leap to try to make a union a place of political vision and political movement, as well as a place that achieved more in what some people call bread and butter unionism for our members. Why were we willing to do that? I have to say I myself didn't come out of an organized political party or movement, and I lose some things because of that. I just came out of a sense of urgency of how much was wrong and how much needed to be changed, and the sense that there was a possibility of changing those things, changing racism, changing oppression of workers. And And it was just a kind of urgent sense that drove me to Cuny and drove me to look for a union at Cuny and drove me to find many of you who were already in struggle. And I think I was thinking about that moment in the mid-90s, why, I mean, a lot of you I'm sure have thought about this, but why our new caucus, our insurgency came together at that moment. There are local causes and then there are global causes, right? I mean, some of the local causes were the increasing assault on Cuny. There was, there had many of you lived through the practice round for global structural adjustment, which was the fiscal crisis of 1975, where I really do think that the ruling class practiced its policy that's now become global austerity policy of starving the institutions that serve working people. And of course, Cuny came in for a disproportionate hit in the 1970s, I think almost entirely because of race, partly also because of class. Columbia and NYU argued against free tuition at Cuny and pushed back against it. But nevertheless, there was this sharp crisis, as you all know, in 1975 that Cuny was never really allowed to recover from. And then, as we know, in terms of local causes, the 1990s saw a new assault of austerity on Cuny. And the governor who led that was Mario Cuomo. So when we hear so much about how there was a wonderful Mario Cuomo and now there's the terrible Andrew Cuomo, I think we have to think about Mario Cuomo, who never supported public higher education. His record may be on public K through 12. Some of you might know better than I do, but Cuomo imposed and sought to impose sharp tuition increases. And with that, lots of contraction of departments. Many of us remember the reports saying that Cuny should be reorganized. York College didn't need, I think it was anthropology, didn't need French. You didn't need that at York. If you really wanted to take that, go and take one course at Queen's. But this sense of contraction and intellectual contraction, there's a kind of local attack on Cuny that I think spurred many of us. And of course, I'm aware of how indebted all of us are to the faculty staff alliance that Cecilia was part of and others on this call to fight in the courts against the racist disparity in funding between Cuny and SUNY. So lots of things were coming together. And also nationally, we were coming after Reaganomics. We were coming just as ACT UP was becoming active, a really powerful model of activism. And I think I quoted this one phrase from Sarah Schulman, who's just written a book, An Oral History of ACT UP. She's a CUNY faculty member, where she reflects on ACT UP, and she says, when we were in ACT UP, however divided we were, whatever else we fought for, and whatever we did or did not achieve, we were the best we've ever been. And that sense of how you are transformed by activism, as well as the hope that you can transform something else, I think is something that some of us learned from movement politics and certainly from ACT UP. So I don't think that was a coincidence that our insurgency began at that time. I think it's also, we also took on this project of maybe visionary unionism before the current resurgence of anti-racist organizing, before the Black Lives Matter movement, and how transformative and potent and epistemologically huge that movement has been. And it was also after intellectual changes, kind of rejection in the academy of straight up Marxism, an embrace of post-structuralism, and also after, and I think this is really important, after feminism transformed and showed how knowledge and structures can be transformed. So all those things I think were coming together in our audacious belief that a union could be a focus of political change on a larger scale, and that we could even dare to think we could make a difference in the world through our union. One of the things I wanted to add in there, maybe two things. One is that the intellectual currents of that period, I don't think we should overlook that. The explosion of knowledge and of rethinking everything that came to some of us through feminism, and some of us through anti-racism, and some of us through post-structuralism, that there is nothing that couldn't be re-seen if you looked at it through the lens of race, or looked at it through with the simple question, where are the women? That transformation in a lot of the fields that many of us are in. And I appreciate Peter Rannis remembering my asking him, whether somebody who was an English professor could take this on. A lot of us in humanities, social sciences, and even physical sciences saw our disciplines transformed. I think that was part of it too, our sense of confidence, this tremendous sense of confidence we had. And the other thing I wanted to acknowledge is how big a role was played by members who had been in left political parties, whether they still were in them or had left them or the parties had dissolved. I think that one thing that all of us, whether we were in those parties or not, one thing that we gained as a union from that was a commitment to systemic thought, systemic analysis, and a willingness to really take a risk for revolutionary change. I mean, those two things from the left parties and from feminism and from anti-racist struggle were powerful legacies that we had, emboldening us and giving us confidence at a moment when politically we could have had no confidence that the mere union of, I think there were 17,000 members when in 2000, that a mere union in a defunded, underfunded, somewhat struggling public urban university could be even make some intervention in broader political life. How did we get to that? And I think those are some of the currents that contributed to that chutzpah, if I can learn that word from lots of you on this call, and political daring, and I guess I would say hope. Where did we get that hope? And also, of course, at the same time, and maybe this was part of why we had that hope, or maybe sense of urgency or even desperation, was the way that the academy in general was being dismantled and undermined by the horrible system of precarious academic labor, which was massively brought in the 80s in response to many economic formations, but also in response to the changing demographics of who was attending college. It went along with mass education, and that went mass higher education, and the adjunctification or undermining of the support for the professoriate and everyone else in the academies. When the professoriate is undermined, so is every professional staff member and every non-professional staff member. It's a general undermining. And there is a strong connection, I feel, between that undermining and the project of mass higher education, really going back to the GI Bill, but the opening of higher education to women, to people of color, to other groups who've been excluded, to working class students. That massive reopening was accompanied by a massive disinvestment. And I know that's somewhat of an oversimplification, but that was part of what gave us urgency. And then I guess the last thing I would say, and thinking about just this opening about why we had the daring to invest the hopes of so many serious people. I mean, I listen to you and I look at people, you didn't talk about your own histories today. You didn't talk about your own incredible accomplishments as union leaders, as health and safety activists, as political activists in many arenas, as fighters long before you came into the PSC. I mean, this is serious people's serious political hopes. And, what an incredible thing to put that together and to keep putting that together. And I think, of course, it's partly because of what we hoped Cuny could be and what we perhaps thought Cuny could or did stand for. That even though in many ways, as several of you have talked about, I think Elizabeth Starcevich, you just talked about it, how much under assault Cuny has been and attacked, and diminished in some ways, even it has grown in size. A lot of us still had the hope that Cuny could be a kind of island. I think Joan Reitano, I don't think Joan's here, but Joan Reitano, part of this chapter, talked about Cuny as a kind of island of socialism. And a lot of us had that hope that Cuny might be a possibility of something different, and a place where we could locate that struggle. At the same time, that hope about Cuny, I think, and I still am concerned about this, runs the risk of putting us in the position of idealizing Cuny and not being willing to make the critique about how the higher education system works. It's not enough to say that Cuny, helps more people move into the middle class than other universities, without questioning what is happening to the middle class, what is happening to the whole relation between classes, and what happens to students who are ejected, I would say, not dropped out, but ejected from Cuny. And I think, and without asking how the education system, although we are part of it, and all of us love it in so many ways, and we see the transformation it brings, I think we also have to keep in mind that radical left critique that the education system functions in part to sort people out and diminish opportunity and ration knowledge, ration resources, and keep them away from others. So those tensions, I think, were part of what we contended with as we took on, and I shouldn't even say took on, continue to take on, because the achievements that you all spoke about so beautifully have continued throughout the years that the new caucus has been in leadership. And I know that there'll be many more. I already see what great work James Davis and the new officers are doing. Why is there this continual investment is partly what I'm asking. And I think it is in part because we saw and wanted to see in Cuny an essentially anti-racist project. Many of us saw that, hoped for that, saw that potential, and hoped for that in Cuny, came to Cuny because of that, and also have struggled with those tensions. So to seeing that potential and seeing, coming back to Bill's question, like, why did so many serious, thoughtful movement people who had put their lives on the lines, transformed their lives, and I know some of you on this call have transformed your lives because of political commitment and been in tremendous struggles because of political commitment. And we were willing to put our stories next to each other, as Toni Morrison says, and put those struggles together. I've been thinking about why we did that and why we located them in the Union. And again, as I say that, I don't mean to suggest that that's all that you were doing. Others of us were doing many other things at the same time, many other struggles. I remember Jackie talking, warnings, don't liquidate your politics because of the Union. And I appreciated that warning. So taking that issue or that question of investing our political hope in this rather fragile and vehicle of a union, this movement of labor that had a rather compromised history, why so many of us felt, let's take a chance on this, let's work together on this. Part of the pleasure was working together. I mean, I don't think we should neglect that, especially in this year where we haven't been able to work physically together. I mean, the joy of working together shouldn't be overlooked. And as I think it was Peter Jonas, you said this about crossing, and Eileen, crossing boundaries between titles, breaking down the boss's hierarchy. There was such pleasure in that, and there still is. I mean, higher education is so hierarchically organized, and being able to break some of those boundaries and work together side by side. I mean, Relisa spoke before. Relisa is one of the co-chairs of the Anti-Racism Committee. She works with two others who are faculty members. They work together. That celebration of breaking down the boss's barriers was, I think, a lot of the pleasure of coming together. And for those of us who didn't have those histories, so like somebody like Bill, who had that history, John Hyland, who had a deep labor history, we learned from you, and we learned, that's part of what I think we learned from you. And then, so we come to this issue of bringing our diverse histories, and Joan, you talked about this imagination. I mean, we dared to imagine really a wholly different organization of society, a wholly different organization of gender, of race, of economics. I don't think any of us thought that we would accomplish that through the PSC. I don't think anybody felt that, but that we were willing to bring that to the PSC and bring the PSC to that, I think has a lot to do with Cuny, has a lot to do with the moment in history, has a lot to do with the energy and the passion, the huge capacity of the people on this call who've been our leaders and whom I've learned from. And then it left us with the issue, the challenge, right? And a couple of you spoke about this, the challenge of making good on the premise we put out there, that a social justice union, a politically engaged union, a union that has an international committee, a union that goes, works on the picket line of bakery workers in the Bronx, that kind of a union that resists stop and frisk, a union that takes position against the war, that union could also deliver more on basic material issues. That was the big bet that we took. And we believed it, I still believe it, and I think the proof is there. I think the proof is there, but it was a scary thing to assert. Some of you had more experience than I did when I came into doing this, but to start with the assertion that because we were going to be strong and visionary and take strong stands on big political issues, we were going to be stronger at the bargaining table. We were going to be stronger in the negotiations with the boss, in the negotiations even within the labor movement. And I think that we can say that. I think that we can say that placing our hope on the radical premise that the labor movement, that labor unions must and have their only power really when they serve the interests of the whole working class and they recognize the diversity of that working class, that labor unions have power only when they do that, not when they simply shrink in and fight defensively for their members only. That's when we will have political power and bargaining power. I do not want to be too quick to impugn the shrinkage of unions to be concerned only with their own members, because there's a reason for that. I mean, there's been unions fiercely under attack, and we don't have time to talk about that now, but there is a reason for that. But we took a bet on that premise, the radical premise that if you fight for the working class, you will get more for your own members. And I think that we have shown that that premise is true. That doesn't mean that we have been able to win everything we set out to win, that's for sure. You know, we look at a union where management used contingency, exploited contingency to lay off people at the adjuncts in June 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, claiming that that wasn't a layoff. Well, technically maybe not, but it was. If you work 20 years for Cuny and you suddenly don't have a job, that's a layoff. You know, so we haven't conquered the issue of funding. Elizabeth, you talked about that. We have a beautiful legislative proposal, the New Deal for Cuny, but we're still fighting on the issue of racist underfunding of Cuny and other things too. I mean, we haven't, so I do not suggest that this bet we took, that if you have a larger vision, a more left vision, a broader anti-racist vision, you can deliver more. But I think the evidence, I think there's enough evidence there to justify that premise. Doesn't mean we have succeeded in everything, but I think we have succeeded in justifying that premise. Go big and you will win for your members as well as for others. So, you know, just to mention a couple of things, and Bill mentioned them, you know, based on that premise, while we worked, I mean, Jim gave an example working on the Immigrants' Rights March and then not giving up, coming back and working on that in trying to form coalitions there. Not saying we don't have time for that, that's not our direct issue, but seeing that it is our direct issue. Fighting for the DREAM Act for students, that is our direct issue. So using that hope, that premise, I think we have been able and will continue, and I hope to do much more to make a profound change in our working conditions. And that for me was based on the premise that CUNY should not always be poor. I had come to this position at CUNY after being in private colleges and also working in a private college where junior faculty had their third year fully funded to prepare for tenure. When I got to CUNY and worked in the PSC, I thought, okay, we should have that. And eventually, even though the library faculty didn't get it in the first round, but we did eventually, Bonnie, as you said, eventually we got more or less the equivalent of a full year of full funding for junior faculty. Other conditions, the sabbatical, the teaching load reduction, the HEO improvements in reclassifications, the CLT differential for having a higher degree. I mean, many, many other things, paid parental leave. All of these were based on the premise that just because we teach the poor, we should not be in poor conditions. And in fact, our conditions should be better because our students need not less support, but more. And every single thing we have fought for at the bargaining table, I would say, is about students' learning conditions. Every single thing is about students' learning conditions when it comes right down to it. We've also used that premise to try to make a deep challenge to the funding model for CUNY. And that's continuing in the proposal we have for city funding, a payment in lieu of taxes by the rich private universities, and in the new deal for CUNY. Repeatedly and with different degrees of success, challenging the basic model of adjunctification. I would say that that battle is only half successful. The last contract had a 71% increase for the lowest paid adjunct titles for a course, but at the same time, CUNY is spreading that model of adjunctification. There are now more adjunct CLTs, there are more adjunct part-timers in the DC 37 staff, and there are more non-teaching adjuncts working in libraries and other places. So that contingent model and the adjunctification of CUNY, the precariat, that is continuing. A couple of other things that I think, have tried to do with that model of taking the assumption that if you expand your vision and if you see the union as a site of struggle for a whole different vision, not just of working conditions, not even just of our institution, but of our city and maybe even the world, that we have been able to expand our struggle and also work on material issues for the members. So I look at some of the other arenas in which we've struggled on the national and statewide unions, pushing within the labor movement on policing and war and racism. And I just want to mention two other things. One is a small thing that we've developed, and that is an old union tradition, which is mutual aid. There have been a couple of times when we've had members who've been in trouble because of health or fires in their buildings or whatever else. And we just did an old-fashioned thing, which is set up a roster of union members helping other union members. We did it again during this last year, at the beginning of the COVID emergency. We set up a roster called the Homework Hotline, where on the very first day, 700 members signed up to volunteer to help the children of nurses in the nurses union who were working around the clock on COVID. And they did free tutoring of their children because the nurses were so overburdened during the beginning of the COVID emergency, and the worst part when we were in the epicenter. And that tradition of mutual aid comes from very old traditions, and I'm proud that we've been able to continue that. And then, as Bill mentioned, this past year, when something different happened, some of you who have been in health and safety activists like Dave Cuddlechuck and Joan know this feeling, but for a lot of us it was new, and certainly for our incredible chapter chairs, a lot of us felt that we had the responsibility for people's lives in decisions about whether they went back to work, and that we were able to rely on each other and the knowledge, the expertise of our health and safety watchdogs, and the vision that had inspired that, I think, was life-saving in every sense of that. And so those are, some of the things that I would cite if I were trying to say, well, was it in any way true that by looking big and continuing as we are, right, even this last week, to make a difference in through our influence, those we can influence in what happens globally, does that distract from what happens locally and at the bargaining table, or does it enhance that? And my firm conviction, looking at this year after year, is that it enhances it. We are stronger, we have more support from members, we have more energy, we have more joy and struggle, we have more power because our members are with us, we have more power because we fight on more fronts. We don't have less power. Power is not a zero-sum game in that sense among members. We have more power because we fight more. And I think that that is what maybe justifies and answers that first question of why people from such disparate backgrounds and with such profound political histories dared to think that they could invest those in a union. And I guess I'll just end by saying that it's a good moment to be reflecting on this because something has happened in global movements and in the labor movement. I think we are seeing a resurgence of organizing. A lot of you have been part of that, organizing contingent workers, gig workers, and others. The incredible transformation wrought by Black Lives Matter, which to me seems not only to have fought back stunningly against state police violence, but also to demand a reseeing of racism, not just as overt racist laws or structures, but to see racism as systemic, operating in every single system and being bolstered, and seeing how our whole economy is bolstered and supported by white supremacy. That insight and the spreading of that insight is a phenomenal achievement. And I think we're in the midst of it. We're so lucky to be in the midst of that. We're seeing other kinds of resurgence right now, globally and left movements and in political parties and elsewhere. So I think it's a really good moment to reflect on where people invest their hopes and whether the big step we took together, as some of us as people who knew each other, some of us who people didn't know each other well, we took a really big step together. We risked a lot in putting so many thousands of hours, so much desire, so much political desire and confidence and hope in the project of a union, which, you know, for many people is not the right vehicle for that. But I think we have tried to make it that vehicle and suggested ways in which it could be. And that has happened only because of being together and in the company of people like the people on this call. So I really want to just acknowledge my debt to those of you on all of you on this call, everybody who has been supportive and turned out and worked and struggled, and also the people who have led us with your vision, your confidence, your systemic analysis, your left analysis, your political hope. That's what keeps us going. So thank you all, path breakers and path sustainers and companions along that path, Retirees chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I mean, Barbara constantly reminds us that she's not only a wonderful speaker, but a wonderful listener. I never cease to be amazed how she can weave into a talk, comments that people have made maybe 20 minutes before, 25 minutes before. I mean, she referred back to comments by 12 or 15 different people, referred back to them by name. And as somebody pointed out earlier, Barbara, of course, remembers everybody's name. Everybody feels that they have a very personal relationship with Barbara. That is so much appreciated. It's getting a little late, but we could go a little overtime. We also want to get to the retiree healthcare stuff, but let's just briefly open it to any further comments, questions, discussion. And I don't see any hands up, but
Santiago's got his hand up.
Santiago, go ahead.
Barbara, I wanted to thank you for what you did for the EOCs. We were always like the stepchildren in that contract, and many times we were left out, maybe a month or two but you always came around, you supported us, and you helped us in terms of getting fair settlement. You supported us at the EOCs, which I think is really something that's very important. I mean, to me, EOC is probably one way to get people up so that they can get into the city university.
Yep.
I agree with your comments about the defunding. I was fortunate. I went to City College when the city still paid tuition. And for that reason, I decided to stay in New York because of what it gave to me. So,
thank you, Santiago.
thank you.
Great to see you.
All right. I see only two other hands up. Let's go to Joe Berger first and then Tony O'Brien. Joel?
Barbara, thank you very much for your service. I really respect you. I respect what you have done, and you were a wonderful leader. You talked about we having power when we're all together. You also talked about taking risks, but there was one risk that you never took. You never took the risk of splitting the union, because I remember many years ago, there was a resolution on the floor, and I was a delegate, and I spoke against the condemnation of Israel. And you facilitated and smoothed over the various passions that were in the audience at that time and had a resolution that was acceptable to all. Now, I know that you were not in the chair at the recent DA, but that resolution which was passed has the potential of splitting us apart. And I personally am thinking of resigning from the union because I can't be associated with such a one-sided inflammatory resolution. You have nothing to do with it. I love you. I really respect what you've done, but I have to make this known publicly and put it on the table. So thank you.
Well, thank you for raising that, Joel. I would say don't leave the union, Joel. We need you. I mean, you've been such a long time member, and we need people to be in the dialogue. One of the things that James Davis said in his message today, and I think Jackie DeSalvo said on one message, was that the university, and I would add that a union, has to be a place where we can have hard discussions and we can talk about tough political issues and issues that attract huge amounts of feeling and history, right? I'm looking around here in this meeting right now. I know there are people who have histories that were personally deeply inflected by the Holocaust. And there are other histories right here inflected by what's happened since in the Middle East. And it's a very challenging, tough issue. The Academy has to be a place where we can have those discussions. I think it's a good thing that there's going to be discussion on the campuses throughout this coming year, I guess, on whether supporting a movement to boycott and disinvest is a good idea. You should be in those discussions, Joel. You're needed there, and so is everybody here. These are hard times, and without commenting on the chair or on the resolution directly itself, I would urge everyone here who's feeling disturbed by that resolution to know that it came out of a process. There were 3 committees that voted to support it. The democratic process of the Delegate Assembly made changes in the initial resolution brought by the Executive Council, and that's the resolution that emerged as an expression of those who voted democratically on it. And we need you, we need your voice, we need you to keep representing your view, arguing for it, be part of the listening and speaking in the union. Unions have to be places for hard things, and I honor you, Joel, for bringing that up and ask you to stay with it. Do not drop out. Do not drop out. You have such a long history in the PSC. We need you. We need your voice. We need your struggle. So stay with it, and let's have the conversation and let's listen to each other. So thank you, Joel, so much for raising that.
Yeah, I also encourage Joel to stay with it. This is a difficult discussion. There's lots of passion on both sides. It's a discussion that we'll have here in the retirees chapter, not today, because there just isn't time to do it justice. But we will have the discussion, and I assume that people saw James Davis's message this morning to the entire membership with a link to the resolution. There will be further discussion of it. Tony O'Brien, and I hope probably most of you know that Tony is Barbara's partner up there, I assume, in the Adirondacks with her right now. And Tony, you're on.
Okay, Bill, I'll be short. I just wanted to make 2 points. One is that I've seen Barbara, of course, close up during this whole process. And one thing I have seen is not so much what she brought to the union, but what the union, as we recreated it, brought to her. I mean, we were, I speak for both of us now, we were essentially in that little tiny world of the radical intellectual left. And we thought it was a very big world, but in fact, it was a very small world. And to take our ideas into this mass organization, whether it was 17,000 or 30,000, was a tremendous test. I mean, we could have shown ourselves to be totally inadequate, especially from the literary side, from in some ways, the most grotesquely unreal part of the academy, and somehow bring what we could bring from that into a mass organization. It was a wonderful growth experience. And I can tell you, I saw Barbara grow and grow and grow over those 21 years because of that. And that, of course, means that the left is irrelevant unless it's engaged with masses of people. So I think that's what happened with the union, and she certainly benefited from it. The other point I wanted to make is that I also saw the stresses, the pressures, the damage that Barbara suffered during 21 years. I mean, not unlike everybody else, but she's shaking her head here. But I did see that. I saw it especially in the last, the last year and a half, of course. You sustained her. You sustained her. I was amazed at how she throve on pressure during that period, especially during the pandemic. And, it's no accident that she remembers everyone's name, because you're all important to her. You all enter into her life, and she remembers that. She was sustained by that. So as her life partner, I would like to thank you very much for myself for sustaining her.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara, yes, I mean, that cheers me to hear that we sustained Barbara, because Barbara sustained us. Yes, Barbara grew, we grew. I mean, it was a two-way street. And I can't begin to imagine, the stresses of the past 21 years. I mean, I know Barbara will tell us time and time again, truthfully, of the joy of these past 21 years. But I know that, heading, a union like ours, there must have been incredible stress. I mean, God, the stress of the last year during the pandemic. But Barbara was there 24/7. So I see two more people, Janice Klein, who was chair at York College for many years, and Elizabeth Starcevic. Janice, go ahead.
You have to go. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Tony, for what you said, because I feel you so described Barbara personally and impersonally, and I'm so grateful for that. You moved me to tears. And Barbara, you always move me to tears, because from the first time I ever saw you, as many people were testifying about open admissions, I felt that there was something new in Cuny. And I had already been in Cuny about 25 years at that time. But for the first time, I felt that there really was a movement to help students, to help faculty, to change the world. And I am so grateful to in any way have known you and been part of that. And I also wanted to say thank you from lecturers, because you brought to lecturers a kind of respect that we had never felt before, and specifics in terms of sabbaticals, pay, and workload that I'm very grateful for. But I thank everyone for their comments today, because the way you spoke to Joel shows who you are, and I don't think I have to say anything more than that. It's a beautiful thing to have been part and to be part of the PSC and to know you. Thank you so much, Barbara, for all your contributions.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Janice.
Janice. Thank you.
And Elizabeth?
I too want to thank you, of course. And I have to say I was surprised to hear that you're going back to the classroom. I'm thrilled about that. As a person who to say only briefly that I have missed my time at the college, at City College. But in hearing that you're going back to the classroom and reassuming your wonderfully academic attitude, after you've just given us this marvelous presentation and analysis of what has happened over these 20 years to the unions within the social movements that were going on, I would like to remind you that what academics do is write books. And I am hoping that that you will write a book about this experience with the union, with all of us, but also the social movements that have been a part of your life and our lives for all this time.
Well, thank
because
you.
That's what we do. We write and we talk about it. And thank you infinitely for that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a beautiful suggestion, and maybe it feels pretty daunting. Maybe. But
what I love is just the radiant smile on Barbara's face throughout this meeting today. That makes me happy. I think it makes most of us happy. Let me make an awkward segue to retiree healthcare and the MLC. Barbara is actually still on the MLC steering committee, which had a meeting today, and Barbara graciously agreed to give us a brief update on that.
Right. So I think it's awkward, but it's kind of appropriate because we are still in struggle, right? We don't come to an end of any struggles just because I'm stepping down from PSC leadership. The fights go on, right? And one of the fights is, nationally, right, is on healthcare and against austerity, and that's what this is. So just as a reminder, the MLC that Bill mentioned is the Municipal Labor Committee, which negotiates on behalf of all the public sector unions for health care, including for post-retirement health care. And I'm still on the steering committee, which is about 17 people, I think, from the unions around the city. I've talked with James Davis about his, we have to do an election within the MLC for him to be on the committee. I'm sure that he would be a unanimous choice, but it just takes a little while to effectuate it. And there's so much going on in the MLC right now that I've been inviting James. He's been in, I guess, the last 3 or 4 meetings of the MLC steering committee where they've welcomed him. So he will be positioned. And actually we did a briefing this morning. We did an 8 a.m. briefing with some of the negotiators from our welfare fund on the issue, including James and our new executive director, Dean Hubbard, and also Andrea Vasquez. So we're really trying to knit those things together. So yeah, it's difficult. We can't just end on a glorious, happy note, but we're in struggle all the time. And we have to bring our whole fight to this. I think the overall big issue that connects to the kind of struggles we just talked about, Bill, is the profiteering in healthcare industry, a huge profiteering. I think the city healthcare costs went from $3 billion to $11 billion in 10 years. I mean, huge increases. And so that's the profiteering motive within the healthcare system, because we don't have national healthcare. And then at the same time, the assumption on the part of the city and sometimes on the part of other unions that the only answer is finding a way to shift the costs onto workers and reduce some costs. I do want to say that some things being reduced, shift costs, but not expand the pie and just say, well, if that's what it costs, then we have to have more taxation, we have to have redistribution so healthcare can be covered. I mean, that's the framework, but I don't want to leave out the fact that there is really profiteering in the healthcare world, and especially in the big, powerful New York hospital systems. So that's kind of the background. And as lots of you know, the city and the unions made an agreement. I did not vote in support of that agreement, but I didn't win in 2018, I guess, to do a healthcare agreement between the unions and the city, designed to protect the premium-free health insurance. And premium-free, I mean, it's a weird term because premium is supposed to be something good, but a premium means, you know, what we pay for health insurance, to protect that and to protect the payments into the welfare funds through this shared city and union fund called the Stabilization Fund, which was rapidly losing money. And also costs were going up, partly because of improvements in healthcare through Obamacare, like coverage to dependents up to age 26 and other improvements. That's part of why costs went up. And the city did not just say, okay, we will redistribute income, or we will bring in more wealth so that we can pay for that for workers. It's a good thing. Instead, they said, our costs are going up, we have to do something. So this is the origin of the agreement, and lots of you are part of, have been following this. I know Bill and others have very closely. So one piece of that was to consider shifting from Medicare itself to Medicare Advantage for Medicare recipients, retirees. And not just for current people, but for every active person as they become a retiree. There are negotiations that have been going on. I am not part of the negotiating team, but I have been consistently badgering them for better information. Here's where things stand as of today. There was a request for proposals put out to several, companies. And what Medicare Advantage does, just to remind us, right? Medicare Advantage is privately administered health coverage. So instead of having Medicare be the bill payer and the administrator of health coverage, a private company, and in these cases, a for-profit private company, would be the administrator. Oddly enough, or maybe not so oddly, the federal government pays a subsidy to those private companies for every person they take on. And to the employer, actually, I don't know exactly how the subsidy works, and to the employer for using the private company rather than the Medicare itself. So the federal government itself incentivizes privatizing, and that subsidy adds up to a lot of money. And the city is not currently getting that subsidy, and nor are we getting anything back from it in the form of the stabilization fund where money could come in. So this is how this was generated, and Medicare Advantage would pay that subsidy. So the city has been negotiating to do a group Medicare Advantage program. Let me just emphasize that this isn't the same as the Medicare Advantage programs that you see advertised, which are individual plans. They are trying to use the power of a group negotiation to create a Medicare Advantage plan that will reap the subsidy that comes from the federal government and reduce costs, and they claim provide better service. The details I still don't have of the negotiations because they haven't settled on one of two providers, or providers. I hate using their language. It affects me. One or two for-profit companies to administer it. So, and that decision has been held up in part because of the activism of our retirees and other retirees across the city, but a lot of leadership by our retirees. And I will say one thing that we got confirmed today was an intervention that I made on behalf of the PSC to insist that Memorial Sloan Kettering and Hospital for Special Surgery be included 100% in whatever group plan is selected. And the answer is yes. They have now gotten commitments from both potential companies that they will include Sloan Kettering and HSS. So that was our direct intervention, and that has worked. But also our pressure has slowed things down, but it will not slow things forever. I mean, I just want to be clear about this. There is, so there was no vote today. There has not been a single company chosen yet. When there is, then the details of the contract will be available. But because they don't have a final contract, those details are not available. The problem is, one problem is that we are going to have to press very hard for enough time between getting a proposed contract and voting on it. My concern is that that's going to come out and they're going to call for a vote within a week. I raised today in the meeting that we cannot do that. There has to be time for us to look at it. It's not just time for a transition. I think some folks in the MLC see the issue as change and transition. That is an issue. Even to the best plan in the world, change is an issue, right? But it's not just change, it's the elements of the program itself. And the key element, I think we all have agreed, is access to your same doctors at the same reimbursement rates. And that is, I think that's the make or break issue, which we continue to press them on. I don't have an answer yet. I was told today that when a single company is decided on, they will meet with us, they will give us that guarantee. I don't know how they can actually give that guarantee unless every single doctor in America signs an agreement, and every hospital, and they're certainly not going to get that. So that for me is the key issue. And so that's where it stands now. We're actively doing briefings and debriefs, and there should be a proposed company providing the service, the privatized management service, and the details of the contract within the next 2 weeks, I think. And then our step is going to have to be to slow that down, at least to examine the contract and see what changes we need, recognizing that this is not, that there is something on the other side of this. The longer this goes on, the more money is drained from this shared health stabilization fund, which does provide welfare fund benefits, chemotherapy and injectable drug benefits, and other benefits. So that's the pressure, and and the pressure is also to keep premium-free health insurance as an option for city workers and city retirees. So that's where it stands, and that's the intervention we are trying to make. Bill very helpfully gave me a list of, I think, the 5 things that COMRO, the retirees organization, needs to see in the contract. And I think we've got to use our pressure, especially because it's cross-union now, to make sure those things are in the contract. So that's, I think that's enough, right, Bill?
Yeah. Let me just state this. I mean, the position of the retirees chapter is for a moratorium. The position on a vote would be no. If it's a done deal, and it sounds more and more like it is a done deal, you know, it's a matter of time. What we want is access to all our current providers at existing Medicare rates, even if they're not part of the vendor's network, and at no extra cost to us. Access to all hospitals currently accepting Medicare, not just the Hospital for Special Surgery and Memorial Sloan Kettering. That's terribly important. But I think of, say, somebody like Peter Jonas, you know, who talked earlier in this meeting, you know, and his access to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, or access to hospitals in Florida. I mean, we have retirees not only all over the country, but all over the world. We don't want gatekeepers permitted to evaluate our physician referrals to specialists, surgical procedures from our doctors, physician orders for CT, MRI, ancillary services, and other treatment plans which are between the retiree and the physician. Also, very important, if there is going to be a deal, I mean, I don't want there to be a deal, that there be a well-defined protocol developed by the MLC to evaluate and maintain the provisions of the contract and the quality of the care during the term of the contract.
Good point.
And then finally, guarantees on maintaining the current costs to retirees. I don't know if there's much more to report at this point. I put in the chat the link to the HP forum on Thursday night. This is Physicians for a National Health Plan. That forum is going to have 2 economists speak, 2 doctors speak, and then there'll be a discussion of the pushback by retirees against this whole process. The PSC Safety Net Committee and the Retirees Chapter are signing on as co-sponsors, something that we've cleared with leadership of our union, since this doesn't contravene positions that we've taken on the moratorium and positions that we've taken in terms of the New York Health Act. Finally, a number of members have urged that we set up a discussion board or something to keep members current. That's something that I don't have the capacity to do, that our EC doesn't have the capacity to do. But if a couple of people would volunteer to maintain such a discussion group, you know, we could set up a Google group. I mean, certainly members of our retirees EC would join that group and respond to issues as they come up. I mean, if anybody wants to volunteer to help set that up, send me an email at retirees@pscmail.org. Even though it's already 11 after 3, certainly if there are comments or questions. If not, we will. I mean, this is a developing saga and one that fills retirees with incredible angst. People are scared. As we learn more, and if there's a need to bring the retirees chapter together, we certainly will. We absolutely will. So kind of ending the day on this rather difficult note of, you know, retirees healthcare. Nonetheless, it doesn't take away for what I just think a wonderful, wonderful event this was. Because of the interaction, Barbara, between you and our members, the interaction between you and our members over the past 21 years. I hope you spent a lot more time up there in the Adirondacks. I know you have Wi-Fi access right now. I hope in the coming days you don't have Wi-Fi access, that you and Tony are in a canoe on those beautiful Adirondack lakes, enjoying yourselves. Obviously, we're going to see much more of you, but Barbara, it's just been really wonderful. And I want to thank you so much.
Well,
so with that.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, retirees. What Tony said was absolutely true. You sustain me. I feel that the exchange, it goes far more in the direction of giving to me than my giving, far more, if you could only know. And yeah, these fights continue and we'll be there. And I'm sure James and I will come together to talk about Medicare Advantage. If that's what makes sense, we will do that. We'll be there. But really, I just want to thank you. Thanks, Bill, for creating this, and whole EC of the Retirees Chapter and all of you. Thanks for creating this incredible opportunity. When I first thought about it, I thought, oh my gosh, will I be able to do that after I step down? And Bill, you made such a wonderful opportunity and event, even though we're not in the same room. So it was really beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you.
Yeah, I think it was beautiful. And thank you, Barbara. We'll also send out the link in an email blast to the PNHP forum on Tuesday or Wednesday. And that's Thursday night at 7 o'clock. So again, thank you, Barbara. Get back in a canoe. Enjoy yourselves up in the Adirondacks. Enjoy. All right.
Thank you
Take care,
so much.
everybody.
Love to you all. Love and struggle to you all.